all of these changes that we've been talking about to increase temperature and changes in precipitation patterns, whether that be amount of precipitation, timing of precipitation, type of precipitation, what have you, that's going to change where species are going to be able to live. And the key question that land managers are facing right now is, will these plants especially be able to migrate to those suitable habitats in time? When I was in grad school, I was part of a research group that used Fremont cottonwood, Populus fremontii, as a model organism for understanding global change, whether that was talking about climate change or how do these native plants deal with invasive species or different nutrient cycling, all that kind of stuff. We use cottonwoods to figure this out. And one of my, a group of my colleagues did an experiment where they took cottonwoods that were from what we called cold adapted places where it would actually freeze during the wintertime. And we moved them to clones of those trees from these populations, and we moved them to a common garden. We took clones of hot adapted cottonwoods and moved them to a common garden. And so now we have these two kinds of strategies of these Fremont cottonwood, same species, different genes, and seeing how they're going to respond to places that are kind of too hot for them and places that are a little bit too cold for them. And what my colleagues found, and there's a link here in the lecture notes if you want to investigate further, what they found is that our warm adapted cottonwoods, so think about, places like Yuma, Tucson, so places where it's hot, right? Our Sonoran Desert cottonwoods, they have smaller leaves. They had higher stomata, right? These pores on the surface of the plant. That means that they had higher stomatal conductance, so they were pushing more gases out of their pores, and that because they're using more of this stomatal conductance, they were actually able to cool the surface of their leaves almost 4 degrees cooler than the ambient temperature. And this is really important for the protein that helps do photosynthesis to not be too hot. So these warm adapted Fremont cottonwood were really good at cooling their leaves, which is not a trait that we saw in the cold adapted cottonwoods. So there's a trade-off though. Because these warm adapted cottonwoods are using more and more water in order to cool their leaves, think of it just like plant sweat basically, they're really dependent on water. And what we're seeing with climate change is not only the temperatures getting hotter, but the amount of water getting lower. And so this might really be a recipe for disaster. So there's a really good chance if we continue to see these really prolonged drought conditions, we might lose cottonwoods in these southern, in the Sonoran Desert where it's really, really hot all the time. The suitable habitat for our saguaro cacti is moving northward as the temperature tends to increase. It actually, we think about saguaros being really hot adapted, but that's not actually true. Is that when they get too hot, that can actually damage their structural and they fall over. We're also seeing the range move east to track the monsoons. So by the end of the century, we're expecting that there will not be saguaros in Saguaro National Park anymore because of the shift in its range eastward and northward. Not only are wild plants going to be affected by the changes that we're seeing in these climatic conditions, our crop plants are also going to be affected. So if we continue to emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases under the business as usual, in 25 years from now, we're expecting to see that much of the US is going to be too hot for most of our staple crops, including corn and barley and soybeans. And that's really going to be shifting northward. And this has really significant effects if we're thinking on the micro scale of individual families, economies, right? So if you're a farmer in the Midwestern US, you should be paying attention and you should be trying to do some stuff, right? And if we're also thinking about it on the macro scale, the large scale, and we're worried about food security for our country, we might want to be paying attention and we might want to be trying to change some things.